Imagine if tomorrow several countries across Southeast Asia announced something shocking. Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. All of them would permanently abandon their national currencies. No more Vietnamese dong, no more Thai baht, no more Malaysian ringgit. Instead, everyone would use the same money. Most people would think the idea was absurd. After all, money isn't just money. Money is power. Money is sovereignty. Money is one of the most important tools a country has. So how could multiple nations possibly share it? Who would control interest rates? Who would fight inflation? What happens when one economy is booming while another is collapsing? Economists have an answer. You can't, or at least you shouldn't. Yet Europe did exactly that. Today, over 340 million people across 20 countries use the euro. But here's the remarkable part. Many experts warned the euro would fail before it even existed. Then, during a massive financial crisis, it nearly did. And yet, more than 2 decades later, the euro is still here. So if the euro has a fatal flaw, why hasn't it collapsed? The answer begins with a war. For centuries, Europe was one of the most violent regions on Earth. Kingdoms fought kingdoms, empires fought empires, borders shifted constantly. War was almost normal. Then came World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history. By the time it ended, much of Europe lay in ruins. Cities were destroyed, economies were shattered, tens of millions were dead. European leaders became obsessed with one question: how do we make sure this never happens again? The answer they arrived at was surprisingly simple: make Europe economically inseparable, because countries that depend on each other are less likely to go to war. Trade increased, industries became interconnected, economic cooperation deepened. Europe slowly began transforming from a battlefield into a marketplace. But there was still one major problem. Every country had its own money, and every currency created another border. The more integrated Europe became, the more those borders became a problem. Then a radical idea emerged. What if Europe shared a single currency? At first glance, the idea sounded insane, because a currency is much more than paper and coins. A currency is a country's economic steering wheel. When inflation rises, governments can respond. When unemployment rises, governments can respond. When exports become too expensive, governments can respond. But if multiple countries share one currency, they lose much of that control. And that's where the problem begins. Germany isn't Greece. Finland isn't Spain. The Netherlands isn't Italy. Each economy grows differently. Each economy faces different challenges. Yet under the euro, all of them would share the same monetary policy. One currency, many economies. That was the contradiction. And many economists believed it would eventually destroy the entire project. Because sooner or later, countries would need different things, different interest rates, different solutions, different policies. But the euro could only provide one. The critics thought this flaw was fatal. European leaders saw it differently. To them, the euro wasn't primarily an economic project, it was a political project. A way to tie Europe together so tightly that separation would become nearly impossible. And despite the warnings, they moved forward. In 1999, the euro officially came into existence. At first, most people never touched it. Banks used it, financial markets used it, governments used it. Ordinary citizens continued using their old currencies. Then came 2002, and Europe attempted something unprecedented. Hundreds of millions of people would switch currencies almost overnight. The German Deutschmark disappeared. The French franc disappeared. The Italian lira disappeared. The Spanish peseta disappeared. Currencies that had existed for generations suddenly became history. For many people, it felt emotional. These weren't just currencies, they were national symbols, pieces of identity. Yet within weeks, they were gone. It became the largest monetary transition in human history, and remarkably, it worked. Tourism became easier, trade expanded, investment increased. The euro quickly became the second most important currency in the world after the US dollar. For a moment, it looked like Europe had achieved the impossible. But success was hiding a problem, a very dangerous problem. The early years of the euro felt like a triumph. Money became cheap. Credit became abundant. Governments borrowed. Businesses borrowed. Consumers borrowed. Growth seemed everywhere. Investors were optimistic. The euro appeared unstoppable. But beneath the surface, Europe's economies were moving in different directions. Germany became increasingly competitive. Its exports surged. Its economy strengthened. Other countries accumulated debt. Some accumulated a lot of debt. Normally, weaker economies can devalue their currencies and regain competitiveness. Euro members no longer had that option. The contradiction never disappeared. One currency, many economies. The euro had simply hidden the problem. Then came 2008, and the illusion shattered. The global financial crisis exposed every weakness inside the euro system, and nowhere was the damage more visible than Greece. Years of borrowing had created enormous debts. When investors lost confidence, panic spread rapidly. Borrowing costs exploded. The government struggled to finance itself. Banks came under pressure. Then came the scenes that shocked the world. ATMs running out of cash, banks closing their doors, retirees waiting in line to access their savings. For a moment, it seemed the critics had been right all along. The fatal flaw had finally revealed itself. If Greece left the euro, who would be next? Portugal? Spain? Italy? Financial markets feared a chain reaction. The future of the entire currency was suddenly in doubt. This was the moment the euro was supposed to die. But it didn't.
The reason is surprisingly simple. By the time the crisis arrived, the euro had become too important to fail. Hundreds of millions of people depended on it. Banks depended on it. Businesses depended on it. Governments depended on it. Trillions of euros in savings, loans, pensions and investments depended on it. Dismantling the euro would have been like removing the foundation from a skyscraper while people were still living inside. The risks were enormous, and so Europe made a choice. Not because the system was perfect, not because the flaws disappeared, but because abandoning the euro seemed even more dangerous. The European Central Bank intervened. Governments created rescue programs. New safeguards were introduced. The system adapted. The euro survived. And that's the twist at the heart of this story. The euro was never just an economic project. If it had been, it might not have survived. The euro is a political project, a symbol of a continent attempting something history had never seen before. Nations voluntarily sharing power. Nations voluntarily surrendering part of their independence. Nations choosing cooperation over separation. Which brings us back to the question we started with. If the euro has a fatal flaw, why does it still exist? Because every time Europe has been forced to choose between saving the euro and abandoning it, it has chosen to save it. Not because it's easy, not because it's perfect, but because Europe believes the cost of breaking apart is greater than the cost of staying together. And perhaps that's the real story of the euro. Not a story about money, but a story about trust. A test of whether nations can remain united despite their differences. More than 20 years later, that experiment is still running, and the world is still watching.